Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Opportunity Costs, the Peril and Profits of Assimilation, an online professional development seminar sponsored by the Teaching with Primary Sources program of the Library of Congress and America in Class from the National Humanities Center. I'm Richard Schramm. I'm the Vice President for Education Programs here at the Center, and I'll be moderating this evening's session. Before we get underway, I'd just like to take a moment to briefly introduce you to the sponsors of the program. The Teaching with Primary Sources program from the Library of Congress helps educators get students engaged and excited and empowered through the use of primary sources. It provides professional development opportunities for educators and guides them in the using of the digitized primary sources available from the library's website. The TPS program contributes to the quality of education by deepening content understanding and improving student literacy in our nation's schools. There are a wide range of TPS programs, and if you want to find out what programs are happening in your area, please go to the website you see down at the bottom of the screen, tps.waynesburg.edu/TPS Eastern Region. I'm sure you'll be able to find some programs in your area that you'll be able to take advantage of. Now, the National Humanities Center is located in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. We are the country's only independent institute for advanced study in all branches of the humanities. That's a mouthful, so let me break that down. We're independent. That means we're a private nonprofit organization. We're an institute for advanced study. That means we run a fellowship program that brings scholars to the center for an academic year to write on topics in the humanities. Subjects like history, literature and language studies, philosophy, criticism of the arts, that sort of thing. We opened in 1978, and since then about 1,300 scholars have worked here, and they've produced about 1,300 books. Now, some people might think the place is an ivory tower, and it sort of looks like an ivory tower, as you can see, but it's really not. We offer lots of programs for a wide variety of audiences, and one audience we're particularly interested in is teachers, and we do a lot of professional development work for teachers. You can find out what we do by going to americainclass.org. That will take you to this page, and from this page you can gain access to all of the programs and resources that we offer teachers, mainly high school teachers, and I hope you'll do that. I think you'll find a very rich array of valuable resources for you. Now, this evening, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be looking at Perils and Profits of Assimilation. You took your readings from this website. After the seminar is over, you will find on this website a recording of the presentation plus a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint you'll see this evening. And we invite you to plunder that PowerPoint for your classes. That's what it's there for. On this website, you will also find access to our online evaluation. Please fill that out. You can fill it out online, take just a few minutes, and submit it to us. It's very important to us, and it's very important to the TPS people. We pay attention to what you tell us, and we try to improve our programming on the basis of what we see on those evaluations. So please do that for us. Once we receive your evaluation, we will send you documentation of participation. This will be a letter that you'll be able to take to your local certifying authority to obtain whatever recertification credit this seminar can obtain for you. Now, I also would like to point out, you can go to our Opportunity Costs website, and you can find there access to what we call the primary document application form. Those of you who participated in the forum know that I put up a post about this today, but this is a very important document. It will help you bring primary sources, primary text into your classes. It's not for use with students. It's an aid designed to help teachers plan their classes. It helps you frame essential understandings, identify key passages, and systematically develop discussion questions that promote close textual analysis. When you go to the Opportunity Costs website, under Assigned Readings, you'll see the access. I've blown up the link right there at the bottom of the screen. Just click on the words Primary Document Application Form, and that will take you to the form, and I hope that it will be helpful as you prepare your classes. Now, how will the program work tonight? Well, our scholar, Joy Kasson, will be making some remarks and posing some questions keyed to a PowerPoint slide. And we hope that you will respond by putting your cursor in the chat box down at the bottom of the screen, the little box I've framed in green. Type your message there, hit the send button to the right, and your message will appear in the large chat box above the send box. I'll be following the chat and bringing it into the conversation as we go along. So let's get underway. We had a good discussion of this topic on the forum. You posed many interesting questions that chart the framing questions that we're going to be using tonight. You'll see those framing questions in just a moment. But here are the questions that you wanted the seminar to address. Why did immigrants come to America? How did their new life in America compare to the life they left behind? Did they feel the journey was worth it? What were the attitudes of Americans already living here toward the newcomers? Did social Darwinism influence non-immigrant Americans' attitude toward immigrants? Was America truly a melting pot? What was the daily experience of immigrants like? How quickly did immigrants generally learn English? How many generations did it require for an immigrant family to become Americanized? And finally, how difficult was it for religious families to maintain their religious and cultural identities in the land of baseball and capitalism? To help us understand the profits and perils of assimilation, and to help us address some of those questions, we're very happy to have with us this evening Joy Kasson, a veteran of our online seminars. Joy is a professor of American Studies and English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has written widely on the 19th century. She's written a fine book about Buffalo Bill when she was here at the National Humanities Center in 1996 and 97 as a fellow. So let me turn the program over to Joy right now. Let me make her the presenter. So Joy, tell us about the profits and perils of assimilation. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thanks to everybody. Let me know if I'm not coming through loud and clear. It's such a pleasure to do this seminar with all of you. I do teach American Studies and English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but over the years I've also done quite a few programs with school teachers, both at the National Humanities Center online, and dating way back to the 1980s, I made quite a few visits to schools under the auspices of something called the National Humanities Faculty. I see that we have a teacher in our group from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and that's actually a school that I visited way back in 1983. So I think that having a conversation with my colleagues, you who teach in secondary schools, and I think that the experience you have and the experience I have in teaching undergraduates at a university level is very similar, and they have a lot to say to each other. This session, particular session is meant to focus on teaching with primary sources, which is something that I do all the time in both American Studies and English. And I can tell from your web posts on the forum that a lot of you have really excellent experience doing this as well. So we can't talk voice to voice, but I'm talking and you can chat back on the chat room, and I hope we'll have some exchange as we look together at some materials that address this question about the profits and perils of assimilation. In thinking about the material and the kinds of questions and the kinds of things we could discuss, I've put together 5 framing questions, and this is our roadmap to the session we're doing tonight. And we'll come back to these and we'll look at them one at a time, but the questions that I had identified are, first, who came to America in the late 19th and early 20th century, and why did they come? That is to say, what kind of primary sources could we look at that would shed light on this question? Second, how did Americans regard newcomers during this period? And we had in the material on the website a lot of very interesting documents that can shed light on this. Third, how did the immigrants themselves express their hopes and fears? And how did they relate their experiences? What sort of forms did their expression take? And that's a kind of a guideline to us to look at what kind of materials we can bring into our classrooms. Fourth, and I was really interested that this came right up in the forum as well, what was the myth of the melting pot? And I'll talk a little bit about that term and where it came from in the early 20th century. What were the pros and cons then and now of assimilation? And finally, this will be a question that's more open-ended, a question that I throw out to you with all of your experience in your communities and in your classrooms. What is the legacy for today of the immigrant experience at the turn of the century? What contrasts and comparisons can we make, and how could that be helpful? Just as you do in your classrooms, I tried to outline a few of what the America in Class likes to talk about as understandings. In teaching this material, before we start digging into particular documents and also having discussion back and forth, we want to have certain facts on the table. And I tried to outline some of those facts that I thought could be helpful, could be our shared basis, and similarly in your classroom could be a shared basis for discussion. Immigration to America expanded in the late 19th century and crested in the first decade of the 20th century. Then it slowed to a trickle with immigration restrictions in 1924 and after. So when we talk about immigration to America, of course, we're talking about all the non-native people who came here from the 17th century onward. But our interest here is the huge swell of immigration that helped to create modern America in the late 19th century, and we'll see some facts and figures about that in a few minutes. One of you in your comments on the forum referenced the concept of push and pull. Why were so many people coming to America at that time in the late 19th and early 20th centuries? Of course, there was the push of turbulence and religious persecution in countries throughout Europe, but there's also the pull of the expanding industrial nation we were becoming after the Civil War. In the North, the prosperity that followed the Civil War was based very much on expansion of industrial capacity, and even in the South, the New South that tried to reclaim its place economically in the United States in the years after the Civil War, even the New South was a South that looked toward industrialism, industrial workers, and therefore also urbanization. Industrialization, urbanization, transformation of America after the Civil War and into the early 20th century. So the people who came to work in those new industries largely settled into in cities and were part of the skyrocketing population there. This put new stress on both infrastructure and services. So there's economic opportunity, but the people who come to this nation to take advantage of that are also part of a population that's suffering from lack of services and lack of adequate infrastructure, housing, transportation, sanitation, and so forth. Now, the topic that we're looking at here, assimilation, has more to do not with economics necessarily, but rather with attitudes. Americanization, what do we mean by that? And that's something that's always interesting to talk about. Immigrants striving for acceptance through assimilation, that is trying to lose what makes them different and become more like other Americans. That includes citizenship, it includes learning a language, but it also includes giving up something, giving up their own identity, their customs, their foods, their language, sometimes even their names. So from the immigrant's point of view, part of the problem is moving to a new environment and figuring out what their place in that environment is. We'll see a lot of our documents, primary documents, addressing that. What response did they? What response greeted them? Often to our embarrassment, not what we bear in mind when we think of our ideal of American society: prejudice, ridicule, and misunderstanding. So as America became more diverse, and with this huge surge of immigration at the turn of the 20th century, all kinds of questions were raised about cultural identity and traditions, and these remain to this day. How can families or individuals retain aspects of their heritage and still participate in mainstream American society? And honestly, I wrote that before I read that great post about baseball and capitalism. That says it all. Okay, so let's go back to the framing questions and my quick run-through of a group of understandings. That's what maybe you would use a textbook, maybe you would use an essay, maybe you would use some handouts with facts and figures. The understandings can be the groundwork on which we build the questions, and we can take those questions to help us address primary documents. So let's start with number 1. Who came to America and why? Here, for example, is a kind of document. This is not from the assigned readings on the web, but it's an example of the kind of thing we can all find when we go searching online with Google. This is from the Office of Immigration Statistics, Yearbook of Immigration Statistics from 2006. And it's a graph showing immigration to the United States, 1820 to 2006. Let's just talk about the way that a document like this, a graph is a document, could be useful in your class. What kinds of questions, what kinds of understandings of immigration would you hope that your students would gain by looking at this graph? What questions might they have when they look at these, and what answers might they come up with? And this is where I'm hoping we can use the chat room, even though we can't talk face-to-face, to begin to talk about this graph. If you were using this in your class, what kind of questions would you like to ask, and what kind of things do you want your students to notice?
Okay, we've gotten some comments straight away here. Trends, upward and downward, spikes and dips. I'd want them to question what is going on in the world that might lead to the peaks in immigration. Good point. What is happening around the world? Again, making that point, what's going on elsewhere that would lead people to come to the United States? What do the peaks represent? I hope the students would ask why the peaks. Really good responses.
Absolutely. So where do we see those peaks?
And let's see, we've got one there in the 90s, and then in the period we're looking at, the teens and 20s, 1990, the 1990s, why the peaks? Yes, turn of the century, right? Okay, 1850s to 1860s, yeah. Okay, all right. Periods of economic prosperity in this country, right? Good correlation there. What legal means is the U.S. using to control immigration? Okay, that's another good question about those charts. You know, why do we have some that are bottoming out? What about the legislative environment in which I can talk. Immigration is happening.
Yeah.
Period of economic devastation in other countries. Another good point. Here's that push factor you were talking about earlier, Joy.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast immigration back then to in the 90s. What laws are different? Downturns, parallel depressions, panics, and/or anti-immigration sentiment. Yeah, I mean, really good responses.
Really
so, Joy,
good.
what do you make of this?
Yeah. Well, so we might, the thing that we hope our students will get, they'll become curious, and just as you suggested, they're beginning to ask, what might account for these peaks and valleys? Of course, one thing that would account for them is how easy or difficult it is for people to come to this country legally. And of course, from the 1820s up to the later 19th century, there's not a lot of attempt to regulate. People just come if they can come to America. In fact, after the Civil War, factory owners advertise for labor, they offer ships passage, they make it easier. There's a reaching out of people making it easier for people to arrive. But right around 1890, where you see that one peak and then it begins to go down again, the U.S. begins to regulate and control immigration. Now, a couple of people mentioned Ellis Island and Castle Garden, which was the New York site that preceded it, were places that processed immigrants, and there are others all around the country: Baltimore, Charleston on the West Coast, Angel Island off of San Francisco. When it becomes more complicated, when there's more regulation, when there's an attempt to regulate immigration, it goes down for a few years. What really caused the huge valley in immigration right there around in the early 1920s was legislation, the Immigration Act of 1924, which you could Google or have your students Google and find out about the ways in which that made it much harder to come to this country. Goes up again during the Depression. It goes down during World War II. It goes down, and as you probably know, when jobs were scarce in this country, there was huge pressure against immigration, against bringing people to this country. And maybe some of you have worked with your classes to study some of the very sad stories surrounding the Holocaust, the difficulty that even people escaping from Nazi Germany, the difficulty that they had in coming to this country. In 1964, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1964 abolished national origin quotas, and that's where immigration begins to climb again. And as somebody commented in 1990, there's a huge spike upward, and that's because there's new legislation. The Immigration Act of 1990 increased legal immigration by 40%. 1990 spike, Middle Easterners and Eastern Europeans is the question. I think it also has to do, I believe this chart is a chart of legal immigration, and part of the Immigration Act of 1990 was one of the attempts to begin to find a way for people who'd come to the United States, particularly from Mexico and Latin America, to become legalized and to stay here legally. So the peaks and valleys show the push and the pull, and they also show a third factor, which is regulation, and that's interesting to look into. Now here's a different kind of graph we could look at. Here's a pie chart, and this deals with some of the things that people were asking: where were people coming from in 1900? Where were immigrants to the United States coming from? Well, interestingly, still overwhelmingly, the largest number is from North and Western Europe. Let's see here. In 1900, immigrants from Northern and Western Europe still predominated, but immigration from South and Eastern Europe was growing. This is the time of Italian immigration, Russian immigration, Jewish Russian immigration in particular, and North American immigration is also beginning to grow during those years. Okay, so here we've used two kinds of, still shocked about the small number from Asia. Yes, in 1900 it still is not that large, and yet, we'll get to this in a few minutes, when you did the reading of response to Chinese immigration and the vitriol, particularly in the East Coast, the great concern about Chinese immigration, you would think the numbers were far larger when you read some of the responses that people had to it. Okay, so facts and figures, charts, visualizations, great materials to use to stimulate discussion. I want to spend some time working together the best we can using this kind of, I ask a question and you respond on the chat. Richard, I see that somebody says I'm going in it, there's a problem with the audio.
That should clear up in time. That's just sometimes the audio signal is delayed to individuals' computers, but it will catch up in time. So there's nothing we can do about that from this end.
Okay, so you're not worried about that.
It should work out for them.
Okay, sounds good. So I want to see whether we can manage to do a little bit of discussion about two kinds of texts that I use in my teaching, and I'm sure you use as well. One is visual texts, photographs, drawings, cartoons, paintings, and the other, of course, is written texts. Now, on this screen, I've laid out a kind of technique for analyzing visual texts, and I want to call your attention to it because I find this very helpful, and maybe this rings some bells with you. Sometimes if you just produce a visual text, a picture, something for people to talk about, particularly with younger students, people start jumping in right away with their strong feelings, their emotions. They like it, they don't like it. Interpretations, sometimes they seize upon some very small aspect of what they're looking at and they draw huge conclusions. I find it very helpful to use, when I'm using a visual text to stimulate a discussion, to try to hold people's feet to the fire and force them to do some careful looking first before they start drawing conclusions. So my four-step plan for analyzing a visual text. First, avoid judgmental and interpretive statements at first and concentrate on careful looking. This does not require specialized language or knowledge. So if you're looking at a painting, you don't have to say it's an impressionist, it's a cubist, it's a Hudson River School. You can just urge your students or your discussants to say what they see. First, let's just all look together. And so step two is, what do you see specifically? Overall appearance, details. Try to get an inventory of what you're looking at. Then step back and ask, what do you know about how and when this visual text was created? What does the caption tell us? Do we know anything about the artist or the creator of it? And then finally, we can get to the point where we can take our careful observation and our contextualization and ask, what can this tell us about its subject and historical period? To me, this is some of the most fun and interesting kind of conversations to have. So let's practice this a little bit. Let's look at a photograph thank you, at a photograph that was among the suggested readings on the website. This is a photograph taken by Louis Hine, Group of Italians at Ellis Island. So if we can do this via chat, let's start with the description and inventory section. And yeah, just throw out some observations. What do you see?
Okay, they're all men. Yep. Varying ages, all adult men. There's a fence separating some men from the others, right? Men look hopeful. Fairly well dressed, lots of luggage, some look happy, some smiling. Okay. I think in this stage of the analysis, we wouldn't want to say hopeful right yet, would we? Would we, Joy?
Right.
We'd want to avoid those kind of adjectives. Like they all have hats on. That's the kind of detail. The original Hat Squad. Lights and windows behind them. Yeah, they seem to be in some kind of, not a basement exactly, but some kind of industrial area or something like that. They're in suits. One is writing. A man watching from behind the fence, waiting for the next thing to happen, okay, in some sort of waiting line. Okay, I think we're tending toward interpretation. Why don't we move on to step number 2 in the process, Joy?
Okay, so we have a caption, and it tells us, this was taken by Louis Hine, and it's called Group of Italians at Ellis Island, and it was taken in 1905. So that information tells us a few things. We know that this is at the high tide of immigration. Ellis Island was the place where immigrants first arrived in America, and they, after getting off the ship, they had to go through a screening process. They had interviews, they had inspections, and if they passed those inspections, they were allowed to proceed into America. How did they know they were Italians? Hine was one of the great early 20th century documenters of social issues. He also did a lot of photographs of men at work. You've seen maybe his photographs of little girls operating textile machinery in South Carolina, or young boys, miners, going down into the mines in Pennsylvania. So he wasn't just interested in the aesthetics of what it was that he viewed. We know that he's somebody who was interested in the social reality behind what he was seeing. So somebody asked a good question. Did he pose the men, or were they already sitting there? I don't think we know that, but that's a good question to ask whenever we look at a photograph. And we see somebody just on the right side with some kind of a pencil and some kind of paper, and he looks like he's looking at the group and he's writing something down. What can we put together now? You've made lots of specific observations. You've observed that in this particular group, they're all men. Would you say that figure sitting on the trunk in the most foreground is the youngest? Does he look like maybe a teenage boy? But they're certainly all male. They are well dressed. They have their luggage tied up in bands. What else can you say about them? If they're waiting, what do you think they're waiting for? And what kind of information about the process of immigration can we draw by looking at this, analyzing this image?
Okay, what can we draw? What inferences can we draw here? I think that there was a lot of waiting, that's for sure. Yeah, I think let's see, perhaps they've been pulled apart from others who needed more intense scrutiny. Let's see, was there some sort of sorting? That's a good point, with men in one area and women in another, came off the boat waiting for paperwork to check in. Yeah, that fence, I think, is fairly symbolic. Maybe the people in the foreground have made it in and the ones behind the fence have yet to make it in. People probably stayed together with people of their own ethnicity. They weren't just free to enter, but they had to go through a process. They wanted to look professional with pride. They all have suits on. Good point. There's an expectation in their appearance. Yeah, I think this is let's see, sitting closely as if they knew each other, but probably did not before finding themselves in this grouping. Yeah, I think this is a picture about hopefulness, about waiting, about anticipation, about looking forward to the next thing. I think that boy in the foreground seems to encapsulate all those sentiments. Roy, what do you think?
Somebody made an interesting comment. Maybe they've been separated at Ellis Island from others. What other explanation could there be for seeing a group of immigrants who are only men.
Okay. What explanation might that be? They didn't come with a lot of things. They traveled light. We have that in reference to our earlier question.
You might think that they came with their wives and families, and at Ellis Island, they were separated. But what would another explanation for that be?
They were single men, perhaps? One of our participants notes.
Yeah, men would travel first.
Or men would travel first, right? Yeah.
So another possibility is, remember the, well, we'll get to that passage in a minute, but remember Louis T. I Sell Fish, who comes over to make a living, and then he wants to send for his wife afterwards. There's a woman in the middle.
I don't
see a woman.
quite see that, but no, I don't see that. Maybe I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I think we have people here maybe coming and starting, you know, establishing a kind of immigrant beachhead before they call back to their families. Yeah,
there are many other pictures of that fence, but often when the people got off the boat while they were waiting, I take it that the people with the luggage are the people who just disembarked, and the people on the other side are the family or friends who are there to meet them. They could talk through that fence, and sometimes you see pictures of people. It's almost like prisoners visiting someone in a prison. They could put their hands up on the fence. They could reach through the fence and touch each other, but until they've been cleared to enter the United States, they couldn't be together. So the fence is really a wonderful kind of image of the barrier that they first had to surmount to come to the country. A photograph like this, you could also take it around the other way, and you could talk about some of the things we know separately about reasons why people came to America: economic opportunity, political freedom, religious freedom. Often people did emigrate with a group, and we could say that that's one thing, that's one way to read this photograph. It's a family group, it's a village. People have all decided to come to America, and they've come over together. They could be rejoining family members, and that might be who's on the other side of the fence, the uncle or the cousin who came first, and then they worked and they saved up money and they sent passage for other people in their family to come. We know that people came to America to escape persecution. They came to escape poverty, and some came because of their desire for adventure. And you could have your conversation the other way. You could discuss what are some reasons, and then you could look at a picture like this and say, do any of these show up in this image?
Okay, here is a good question. Did they need to prove they had a job so that they weren't a burden on society? Do you know if a job was essential to get in the country?
I think they had to prove that they had, either they were coming with money, and of course it changes at various times. Today, I think that is true. You have to have a sponsor, you have to have a job, you have to have a, you know, a guarantee that what you're coming to do can't be done by an American, you know, a lot of those things. But I think coming with some cash was, in the 1890s, was sufficient. You know, they also had to prove they weren't sick, and you've probably seen some of these photographs of the so-called medical inspections that they had. The laws from 1890 to immigration restriction in 1924, the interviewers at Ellis Island were supposed to try to screen out criminals, the insane, the sick, and the dangerous. So often in a language that the people didn't even speak, they were asking questions designed to elicit that information. And that's kind of an interesting question to find out. There are other photographs of people sitting in rows waiting for their number to be called to come up to the desk of the inspector. They also were examined by a doctor. There was a lot of concern about various communicable diseases, tuberculosis, eye diseases, and so forth. But the kind of the mass inspections were often, if you weren't sick before, you might be sick afterwards.
Yeah. We have one question here, and then very quickly on this question, and then we got to move ahead. We have less than an hour. Do you have any idea how long the process took when people landed at one of the induction stations or the entry points?
Yeah, was it more than a day? I think it was. I don't think they had facilities to hold them overnight. So I think it would be a kind of a long day, or maybe they held them on the boat until they could get through, till they could clear. The point about changing names, that's a kind of a famous, a lot of people's families have that. Their names were different. After they came to Ellis Island, the inspectors couldn't understand, or they misunderstood. They had to write it down. The famous joke I remember hearing was the old German man who's asked, well, what's your name? And he says, he's so confused. He says, "Ich habe vergessen." I've forgotten in German. And the inspector writes down, "Ichabod Ferguson." And that happens. Did the countries try to purge sick populations? I don't think it was intentional on the part of other countries. I think sick people were desperate to get away. The Irish potato famine is a case in point, when people were just desperate to leave, and the sickness was part of what was wrong in the old country. How often did they get refused to enter? That was not unusual, and even family groups being split up. You can see some photographs of that and read some accounts. Okay, well, let's move on to analyzing texts. And here I've also suggested a kind of a formula for, I'm sure you all have these that you use yourself in the classroom, but I find it very helpful working with students to, before you plunge into talking about what the text means, to get people to just step back and ask themselves the questions: who is the speaker? When was this produced? What sort of text are we reading? Book, letter, interview, diary? Then this is the sort of equivalent to the visual inventory of the photograph. What does it tell us? What's the information in this text? Then the next deeper step, what can we tell about the speaker's attitude and perspective, as well as factual information? And then we're working toward a bigger picture that we can ask, how does this help us understand the experience of immigration as seen by the immigrants? So again, I sort of like, when teaching with these, to get people. Of course, the great thing about proceeding this way is that you don't have to be afraid to speak when you're being asked pretty straightforward questions. And of course, a lot of people do use this similar technique. Thanks for the comment about NARA. Is that how you say it? N-A-R-A. Okay, so in the American Memory in the material from the American Memory website, because this is a seminar that's based on the Library of Congress texts that are posted up there on the American Memory website. There are some wonderful interviews, and many of them, if we read them carefully, address this question. Remember, we're still in the first of our framing questions: who came to America and why? This is, so who is the speaker here? Well, the caption down here tells us French-Canadian textile worker Philippe Lemay. When was it written? Well, this is an interview substantially after the fact. A lot of these interviews on the American Memory website were done in the 1930s. I guess part probably of the WPA oral history projects. And what sort of text is it? It's an interview. So whenever we're looking at an interview, we have to factor in the fact that someone else is writing this up, not the actual speaker. They're trying to be true to what they think the person actually said, but there's another person between us and the speaker, and that is the interviewer. So, what information do we have here? How does it address this question? Who came to America and why?
Shall we?
And yeah, Richard, you wanted me to read the passage, didn't you?
Yeah, just get it on the table while people are thinking about it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, would you read it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Why did our people leave Canada and come to the States? Because they had to make sure of a living for their family and themselves for a number of years, and because they greatly needed money. The wages paid by the textile mills was the attraction. Our people didn't come to the States with money they'd saved up, though, since they immigrated because they were really obliged to go where they could earn their daily bread and butter. To raise enough money to buy railroad tickets for the family and pay for food, rooms, and other expenses en route, they had to faire en con, sell their household goods at auction. That money was practically all gone when they arrived here, and all they possessed was the clothes they had on their backs, you might say, as they were poor. All those who were old enough went to work without waiting to waiting to take a much-needed rest. They boarded at first with relatives, if they were lucky enough to have any here, or in some French-Canadian family, until they could rent a tenement for themselves, mostly in corporation housing, and buy the furniture that was strictly needed. Money was very precious to us in those days, and we spent it carefully, getting along with only the things we couldn't do without. But we were able to make a living and save something besides. So they came for jobs, wages. Okay, that's our first. Who came? Well, some French Canadians came, and they came for money.
Yeah, and for the future, good point, savings, to make savings for later on. This is a great passage because it has so many really concrete examples in it, concrete details that go so far as to that address some of the questions that you had asked before. Yeah.
Do we know exactly what question here? Do we know when LeMay came? Is that in the interview?
I don't think it is in the interview. Let me see here. In some of these interviews, maybe you noticed this, you can pursue the footnotes that they give you. These seem to come from a book called American Life Histories, 1936 to 1940.
We have our answer, 1870s and 1880s from the readings. Okay. So we really need to move on.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. But what can we tell about his attitude here?
Okay. What can we say about his attitude? I think he's certainly, matter of fact, he's very practical. Yep, very practical. And, yeah, I mean, he was grateful for the work. Yeah. I mean,
and he's looking back. He's saying money was precious to us in those days, and we spent it carefully. That sounds to me like somebody who, you know, can look back and say, okay, now it was a success, and now I look back and it was worthwhile. Used it as a means to an end.
Yeah, if he can say money was precious back then, and this is 1938, 39, in the Depression, I'm sure money is still precious to him, but he can take a bit of a distance on it. So it does suggest that he's been successful. Yeah.
Okay, and here's one more. This is the last piece of evidence in this section. Who came to America and why? Here is another recollection of an immigrant from American memory, and this is Andreas Uhland, and he writes, "Father died in January 1870. That changed abruptly my whole aspect of life. An older brother was to have the farm after mother. What was I to do? Mother wished to have me educated to teach, but I did not wish to be a teacher. There was left the choice to stay home and wait for something to turn up, go out as a laborer, or learn a trade, or to sea, or to America." And then he goes on, so that's a pretty clear description of the situation in which he found himself. And then he has this great image. Norwegian and Swedish immigrants came here in canvas-covered wagons pulled by oxen. And where they found no human trace on the ground, they unhitched, built log or sod houses for shelter, and out of the wilderness made what I now see. How proud they well may be of that hard creative work. They have been given political independence and have earned economic independence of their native countries. And they must, I think, for their own development and in the interest of their adopted country, attain intellectual and spiritual independence too, without a dual national sentiment. So a couple things here. When was this published? It was published in 1929, and he decided to come to America in 1870. So he's an old man looking back. I think he also sees immigration as a success. He speaks not just of the material benefits, but of political independence and economic independence as well. It's interesting to say, we might think that he would say, well, I had no land, so of course I went to America. He had to think about it. He could stay home and wait for something to turn up. He could go out as a laborer. He could learn a trade. He could go to sea or come to America. And from that set of choices, he chose America. The last part that I highlighted in red here, I think takes us back to our overarching question here, which is about assimilation. Because after commenting, do you notice this? After commenting on what it was like to immigrate, his sense of success, he also says, I think they have to attain intellectual and spiritual independence without a dual national sentiment. So we're going to be talking about, can you keep your ethnic identity and still be an American? And he's kind of coming down on the side of, no, really, you should go all the way to be American. Thank you for noticing that phrase, I saw no human trace and I was in the wilderness. That is such a wonderful example of the ways in which the rights of the Native Americans were not even being considered, often by many immigrants. So thanks for pointing that out. Okay, on to framing question number 2. How did Americans regard newcomers? And in the American memory section, some of the most stunning material was that whole section on Chinese immigration. And I don't know if you found it shocking. I don't know whether this material would work for you in a school setting, in a classroom setting, because it reveals some of the most vitriolic kinds of feelings about, in particular, Chinese immigrants, but it reminds us that American society was not always living up to its promises. Let's see. Whoops, wait a minute. Let's take a closer look at this political cartoon here. How did Americans regard newcomers? This is a cartoon. Wait, I think have we lost our caption? Here's our caption. The Chinese must go, but who keeps them? It's from a California periodical called The Wasp. It was produced in 1877 to 78, and it's from the American Memory website. Now, how do you take this political cartoon? What's this donkey, and what's going on in all these little pictures? The Chinese must go, but who keeps them? No, WASP. I don't think WASP had the same meaning. I think the WASP here was it was a very satirical, critical newspaper, and the idea was it was going to sting those in power.
Yeah. We have here the Chinese are being kept here because they're employed in service industries. We are using the Chinese, so we keep them here by using them. I think that nails it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Richard and I had a great conversation about whether that's a democratic donkey or whether that is a braying ass, the kind of the donkey wearing a kind of a militaristic hat and yelling, the Chinese must go. but all around him are these little vignettes. The donkey's the beast of burden. All around us are these little vignettes of Chinese people in the society of the time. What do you see them doing there? What are the Chinese doing, and who is keeping them?
Yeah, there's a laundry, obviously, on the left-hand side, people bringing in bundles of dirty clothes. What else do we see there? And then down at the bottom is somebody ironing, perhaps sewing, so tailoring. Yeah, and we've got a fishmonger, shopkeeper, stereotypes are reinforced, teamster, guy driving a wagon. Yeah, service jobs that Americans may not want to do. This kind of echoes the 21st century argument about immigration. Did Americans regard ethnic European immigrants more sympathetically than they did non-European immigrants? That's a good question.
Yeah, there's a book, a very interesting book called How the Irish Became White, because in the 1840s you could find cartoon representations of Irish that are similarly vitriolic. They show them as animal-like and subhuman. But somewhere in the course of the 19th century, the Irish came to be seen as white, but immigrants from more different cultures, both who have more identifiable features like Asians, but also more swarthy skins like Italians and Russian Jews, were not considered white. So yes, there were many cartoons portraying Irish as, and the same kind of stereotypes have been used against various immigrant groups, and it is very offensive. I agree. And I'm interested in somebody's comment that they think high school students can handle unpleasant and offensive materials, but it's nonetheless a challenge for us as teachers, even on the college level. You know, I have people who sit in my class and somehow they go away thinking that I'm endorsing some of the attitudes that I'm trying to inform them about. Okay. So in that section from the American Memory website, we had some interesting texts as well. This is by Hinton Helper, who you may be more familiar with as a post-Civil War. After the Civil War, he came south with the Union troops, and he was one of the so-called carpetbaggers who wrote about the South after the Civil War. But in 1855, he was in California observing and writing about what he saw there. And he writes this about the Chinese. According to the most reliable estimates, there are at the present time about 40,000 Chinese in California, and every vessel that arrives from the Celestial Empire brings additional immigrants. A fourth to a fifth of these reside in San Francisco. The balance is scattered about over various parts of the state, mostly in mines. A few females, say 1 to every 12 or 15 males, are among the number. Among these, good morals are unknown. They have no regard whatever for chastity or virtue. You would be puzzled to distinguish the women from the men, so inconsiderable are the differences in dress and figure. The only apparent difference is they are smaller stature and have smoother features. They are not generally neat in their outward habit. And then Helper asks, is this Chinese immigration desirable? I think not, and contrary to the expressed opinions of many of the public prints throughout the country, contend that it ought not to be encouraged. It is not desirable because it is not useful, or if useful at all, it is only to themselves, not to us. No reciprocal or mutual benefits are conferred. In what capacity do they contribute to the advancement of American interests? Are they engaged in anything that adds to the general wealth and importance of the country? Will they discard their clannish prepossessions, assimilate with us, buy of us, respect us? Are they not so full of duplicity, prevarication, and pagan prejudices, and so enervated and lazy that it is impossible for them to make true or estimable citizens? And you may know that the Chinese Exclusion Acts specifically at the end of the 19th century specifically said that Chinese people could not become citizens. So this is painful even to read, but what are some of the stereotypes and some of the attitudes toward Chinese that we see in this passage?
Okay. I think it's interesting. The source mentions the Chinese are not generally neat in their outward habit. And they ask by what standards? Again, comparing American standards to those of the immigrants we might not understand. And then Ruth Mills notes, how would the Transcontinental Railroad have been built without the backbreaking work of the Chinese? So that answers Helper's question about did they contribute anything to the country?
Yeah,
but right. we have all these stereotypes: low morals, lazy, lacking virtue. Aren't these stereotypes that are imposed on just about any immigrant group that is seen as undesirable?
And they're seen as undesirable maybe because the people looking on don't understand what they're seeing. Yeah. You can't tell the men from the women. You know, they all wear pants. So if we think of American, think of Mary Lincoln and her hoop skirts in the 1850s. They did not look like what Americans and Western Europeans expected people to look like, and so therefore the observers feel that they're not neat and they're of bad morals and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, can we move on to the next one? And it's a good question here. Yvette Walker asked a good question. At what point do the original immigrants become the gatekeepers?
Yeah.
And you can say that for subsequent generations of immigrants as well.
Yeah.
That goes back to one of the questions from the form. About how many generations, Joy, do you think it takes for a family to become Americanized?
Oh gosh, I don't. Well, okay, so. I'll talk in a few minutes about Oscar Hanlon's book, The Uprooted, and there is a kind of a classic situation where the children of the immigrants throw themselves into the process of Americanization, and they can't wait to be more American, to speak better English. They look down on their parents. But the third generation take a renewed interest in the grandparents, and it would be interesting to see if anybody has any experiences like that in their families. I think it depends where they're living, what other institutions they have to support them. In some big cities, you could live in a Jewish or an Italian part of the city and still speak another language, not know anybody who wasn't of the same ethnicity. I think in those situations, people might take several generations. Yeah. In other cases, the children are just really eager to shed what makes them different and to be like everybody else.
And we'll come back to that point at the end, because that whole business of being Americanized is something that I know you want to get at the very end. So let us move ahead now.
Yeah,
we got less than a half hour.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the last text in this section about how did Americans regard newcomers, and this is by Mark Twain, Roughing It. And I won't read it all, but the thing to point out here is to say that what a challenge it is sometimes to get students to understand tone. You might read these words and think that he is being as dismissive and disrespectful as Hinton Helper, but in fact, he's making fun of those who dismiss and look down on the Chinese. He says they are a harmless race when white men either let them alone or treat them no worse than dogs. He says the Chinaman is a great convenience to everybody because he bears the most of their sins. A white man can swear a Chinaman's life away in the courts, but no Chinaman can testify against the white man. So Mark Twain has this way of noting the most making the most devastating social criticism with a kind of wide open eyes, sort of as if he's just explaining. Okay, yes, Twain was such a keen observer of mankind's foibles. And I appreciate this comment about the idea of fitting in and being Americanized is not at all different from high school students' need to fit in today, whether they're immigrants or not. Let's go to the third framing question. How did the immigrants express their hopes and fears, and how did they relate their experiences? And here I'm thinking that in addition to the, in the last section, we were looking at how people already in America looked at some immigrants, often with not particularly welcoming points of view. But of course, the great symbol for immigrants' hope for being welcomed in this country is the Statue of Liberty. And this is a sheet music. One of the great things on the American Memory website is their collection of sheet music. And you can often find just amazing images here. And here's a song from a song sheet from 1916, The Song of Our Land, Liberty, and this great portrayal of the Statue of Liberty against a sunset sky in which the stars in the sky and the stripes of the sunset are, of course, the American flag. So in looking at the problems the immigrants encountered, we shouldn't ignore the questions of their hopes and fear, their hopes, but also their fears. A couple people mentioned on your forum posts that you've visited Ellis Island, and I presume the Statue of Liberty if you're nearby. Of course, the poem written by Emma Lazarus, The New Colossus, and engraved on the Statue of Liberty is an excellent one to promote conversation. And even with my college students, it takes a little working to get them to understand that she's comparing the Statue of Liberty to the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the wonders of the ancient worlds, the brazen giant of Greek fame with conquering limbs astride from land to land. That's not what this is like. It's not about conquering. At the gates is a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. And then in red is this section that is often has been set to music as well. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. It's kind of interesting in that section that you might say that she's invoking the negative stereotypes, huddled masses, wretched refuse, homeless, that these are negative qualities of the immigrants, but she's expressing the hope that that immigrants will find here a welcome from the Mother of Exiles. Back to a visual text here. How did immigrants express their hopes and fears, and how did they relate their experiences? This is another of Lewis Hines' photographs from his Ellis Island group of photographs in 1905. Does anybody want to post here a comment or two about hopes and fears that we can see in this?
Any takers? I mean, we got one element of hope. You've got young children. The mother looks worried. That's true. She does look worried, concerned a bit. Here we see women and children who weren't there before in the Italian photo. Mm-hmm. It's true. So I think in women and children establishing families, these all of these things are very hopeful. Yeah.
How are
right.
they dressed?
No dad here. No family who often are the breadwinner or the solid rock of the family. 2 generations. Mm-hmm. Not as well dressed as the men were. Yeah. So Joy, what was your question again? What did you?
Oh, I want to go back to that. Not as well dressed. What do you think
No.
about the clothing there?
Well,
I think the father is looking for the lost baggage, by the way.
that's how they're separated.
Yeah,
Boy
yeah.
seemed protective of the little girl. Good point. He sort of arched over her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking straight at the camera. I mean, he's not, and so is the mother. I mean, they're not the older people in this are not they're not shy or hesitant about coming to the new world. This is probably their best in terms of their clothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good comment.
Yeah. They have determination
In their eyes. Yep.
Yeah. And the clothing that they're wearing, the mother's wearing the scarf and the embroidered shirt and the probably hand-sewn bonnets for the two little girl babies. It's their best clothing, and it's also expressive of their culture from which they're coming. And one thing to notice is how it's the kind of clothing that once they get settled in America, the question is, do they want to kind of preserve their culture through their clothing, or do they now want to fit in and buy ready-made clothes and look just like all the other Americans? Well, I want to call your attention to a book that actually is a little bit out of favor now among academic historians, but I think it is a book that contains a lot of interesting information and perspectives that can help us with these questions of attitudes. Oscar Handlin was a Harvard historian who was an important social historian in the 1940s and 50s and into the 60s. And he wrote a very sociological book about immigrants in Boston. He followed it with this book called The Uprooted, The Epic Story of the Great Migrations That Made the American People. He says, once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America, then I discovered that the immigrants were American history. Immigration altered America, but it altered the immigrants. Immigration took people out of traditional accustomed environments, replanted them in strange ground among strangers where strange manners prevailed. The customary modes of behavior were no longer adequate, for the problems of life were new and difficult. And I think that Handlin did something interesting by turning the question from why can't people assimilate more quickly to the question of what was it like to face such a major disruption and what were the consequences of that in their lives. And somebody earlier posted about Anzia Yezierska. In the readings, we had a couple of short stories of hers written in 1920. She was an immigrant herself, and most of her writing is somewhat autobiographical. In this story, The Lost Beautifulness, the immigrant wife, Hannah Haya, is working as a washerwoman. Her son is in the army. It's a kind of a pathway to Americanization, and she saves up all her money to buy paint to make her kitchen, to paint her kitchen so that it would not be dirty, it would not be run down, it would be like the Stuyvesant Square mansion of the woman for whom she works. It was a dream come true. It was her dream, the ecstasy of loving service. She had shining, her eyes were shining with eagerness and the joy of life. And of course, it's a very sad story because she gets totally beaten down. The landlord, seeing that she has made the apartment nicer, raises her rent. And in the end, she can't afford to live there anymore, let alone make it nice for her son. So hopes and dreams, but fears that they won't be able to be realized. This came out in some of the interviews. I guess I'll just kind of go through these rather quickly, but these are really interesting interviews. Remember the one, the Sarnoff family, where the husband is working in the rag factory to send his children to school. He works extra hard to buy a piano. They take in boarders. The daughter sleeps, the children sleep on chairs. They buy a piano, and remember what happened to them in this story, he ultimately dies of lung congestion caused by the lint that he inhales in the rag shop. So they have a dream, they work hard, and yet it doesn't always work out for them. Louis T. I Sell Fish, another of these interviews from the 1930s. He has that great voice. You think my troubles were over? No, my troubles were just beginning. He couldn't bring his wife over because he had been smuggled into the country. He had plenty of troubles. He couldn't go back to Poland. He couldn't bring his family over. And then remember those ups and downs. The laws changed in the 1920s, and there was a kind of amnesty for the people who had come before 1921. Now they could become citizens. He could, well, I can tell you I got my papers as soon as I could. I brought my wife and my daughter to Chicago. And as you can see, I still sell fish. Yeah, right. He gets a little credit, and he sells more, and then he gets more. He can make his living. The fourth framing question, and this is the last one before we have kind of turn it loose and make some comparisons today. The melting pot is by now a kind of a cliched term, but I want to draw your attention to the play from 1916, the play that was written with that title, from which that term famously came. And the American Memory website has amazing material. It has this, this is the program for a production of the play in 1916. It has photographs, it has programs, and the play, The Melting Pot, traveled around on the Chautauqua circuit, to being played in small towns throughout the Northeast and Midwest. It was a drama written by an immigrant, is Israel Zangwill, and yeah, the mosaic, salad bowl are terms that we that kind of take us to the question of whether groups can preserve their preserve some cultural heritage even while becoming American. But it's kind of interesting. The pros, this it kind of looks. It's kind of a horrible image, isn't it? This pot being boiled and these people being melted down into it, and yet it's in this image. It's seen as a positive thing. It's an interesting American symbol on the pot above the fire, and the Statue of Liberty's torch is pulling all the people into this stream that brings them into the melting pot. Well, what was this play about? The play is about a Jewish immigrant named David who has come to America from Russia, and he's a very gifted musician. He wants to write a symphony, and he meets another woman who herself is also an immigrant named Vera, and they fall in love. David describes to her, they live in New York, David describes to her, I love going to Ellis Island to watch the ships coming from Europe and thinking about those weary sea-tossed wanderers, what I felt when America first stretched out her great mother hand to me. The same image as in Emma Lazarus' poem. Were you happy? It was heaven. You must remember that all my life I had heard of America. Everybody in our town had friends there or going there or got money orders from there. The earliest game I played was selling off my toy furniture. All my life was America was waiting, beckoning, shining, the place where God would wipe away tears from off all faces. It's a kind of a classic statement of America. To think that that same torch of liberty, which threw its light across all the broad seas and lands into my little garret in Russia, is shining for all those weeping millions of Europe, etc. Oh, Miss Ravindal, when I look at our Statue of Liberty, I just seem to hear the voice of America crying, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest, rest. And then he breaks down sobbing. And he says, I just wanted to tell her what America means to me. Well, David and Vera decide to get married, and so he meets her family, and then we learn the backstory. The reason he's sobbing when he talks about coming to America is that he left on a push. The push was the pogroms against the Jews in his town in Russia, and the army invaded his town, and his mother and father and sisters were all killed in front of him, and he's the only survivor who comes to America. When he meets Vera's family, he realizes that her father was the army officer in charge of that pogrom. So she renounces her family, she rejects her family, but he can't even think about seeing her again. He goes off and he writes this brilliant symphony, and it's performed. And at the end of the play, Vera and David are reunited. He's written his statement about America, and now they're able to get back together. And they look out over the New York Harbor after the storm. They're going to get back together, and he sees the Statue of Liberty, and he sees New York Harbor itself here as the melting pot. There she lies, the great melting pot. Listen, can't you hear the roaring and the bubbling? There gapes her mouth, the harbor where 1,000 mammoth feeders come from the ends of the world to pour in their human freight. Ah, what a stirring and a seething, Celt and Latin, Slav and Teuton, Greek and Syrian, black and yellow. And she says, Jew and Gentile, yes, east and west, north and south, the palm and the pine, the pole and the equator, the crescent and the cross, how that great alchemist melts and fuses them. This is so interesting to me. It's such a barrage of cliches, and yet it's very moving. It's interesting, right? Somebody says that all the references are coming from scripture, Christian scripture, or shared Judeo-Christian scripture. I'm not sure, but he has this image that they will, in fact, unite to build the Republic of Man and the Kingdom of God. What is the glory of Rome and Jerusalem, where all nations and races come to worship and look back, compared with the glory of America, where all races and nations come to labor and look forward? And so, yes, this is during World War I. America is the shining example. He ends with a benediction, and the play comes to this remarkable end. So, you know, yes, the melting pot, an idea of the earlier 20th century, in the context of the play, to give up your ethnicity, or to give up what you had before, was to give up the hatreds that you had before too. So it's a kind of a vision of possible reconciliation as well.
Well, Joy, that allows me to bring in a question that was posed earlier in the chat. When immigrants came, how did they get along with each other? I mean, when they came to the New World, when they came to America, they brought the tensions and animosities of the Old World with them.
Yeah.
So how did they get along with each other here in the New World?
Yeah. Well, then we might look at institutions that institutions like, for example, churches and schools in these cities. There were often Italian Catholic churches, Polish Catholic churches. The remains of these can still be seen in all our cities today. But there were other institutions that cross-cut across ethnicities, like labor unions, where economic need was bringing people of the different ethnicities together. But there's a huge, that's a very big theme, isn't it? In early to mid 20th century literature is the people who have hereditary hatreds, have learning to work and to work together. Influence of progressive era, absolutely. Don't you think so? All races and nations come to labor and look forward. It's all about building a better future. I want to mention a couple of other texts. Abraham Kasson, short novel Jekyll, A Tale of the New York Ghetto, which was made into a remarkable movie called Hester Street. Maybe some of you have seen, and maybe some of you use it in class. It's a great it's a teaching text. In this story, a Jewish man has come to New York, like the men in that first picture. He came to America to work and make money, and now he's sent for his wife. But he has become Americanized, and in fact has fallen in love with another woman in America. And when his wife and baby come over from the old world, he's embarrassed by them. He thinks they're greenhorns. He criticizes her appearance, and then this is the wife's despair that her dream of coming to America is not working out. Better, she had never known this black year of a country. Here everybody says she is green. What an ugly word to apply to people, etc. Her heart was wrung with the most excruciating pangs of homesickness. Even the burnished cup of the electric bell knob looked contemptuously and seemed to call her greenhorn, greenhorn. Lord of the world, where am I? She whispered with tears in her voice. And in the novel, but even more so in the film Hester Street, the kind of neglected wife really kind of comes out on top. And then we have these, in our interviews, we have a couple of them that deal with the conflicts between the older generation and the younger generation, the children who want to be more Americanized, the parents who then appear like tyrants and killjoys. Jacob Riis, the great reformer, progressive reformer, who with his photographs and his essays, How the Other Half Lives, trying to reveal the slum conditions and the terrible physical conditions of the slums where the immigrants live, but at the same time very very uneasy about any persistence of ethnic cultures. A fish stand full of slimy, odd-looking creatures, fish that never swam in American waters. They eat sausages. They keep their old ways. He was an immigrant himself, of course, from Denmark, but he wants the immigrants to have clean, safe place to live, but he wants them to give up their old ways. And in this photograph by Jacob Riis, I think the kind of problem of the question of whether how immigrant people could keep some touch with their customs while surviving the economic rigors that they found in New York. So here's this Orthodox Jewish man in a coal cellar. He lives in a coal cellar, homeless, one of the many kind of homeless and dirty people that Riis photographs. And for Jacob Riis, this is an example of the kind of slums that have to be cleaned out and start over again. But if we look at this very carefully, we see that in this coal cellar, he's managed to put a tablecloth on the table, and he has the braided challah bread for the Jewish Sabbath. He's clinging to some kind of culture and tradition, even under difficult circumstances. So keeping your traditions, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How did people do this? What were the pros and cons? Another text, not on the American Memory site, that speaks to this is Jane Addams' memoir, 20 Years at Hull House, about her establishment of the settlement house in Chicago. And she writes about coming to realize that that the younger generation has to it doesn't honor any of the knowledge that the elders have, and she creates something called the Hull House Labor Museum that honors the handcrafts and the sewing and the weaving that some of the women who came from other countries were keeping in chests. They were embarrassed by their children, were embarrassed by them. So the problems of assimilation, the problems of continuance, the economic problems and hardships combined with the psychological issues for immigrants have been issues throughout. And I just want to end with this image also from the American Memory website to ask the question, the final of the framing questions. And I don't have any other material. I'm just asking it so we can talk about it if you want. What is the legacy for today of the immigration experience at the turn of the century? And this is an etching from 1976, which was, the bicentennial of American independence and the centennial of the Statue of Liberty, the gift. It wasn't installed for another 10 years after that. But this artist, Esther Hernandez, imagines herself recarving the Statue of Liberty so that instead of the Mother of Exiles, it's turning into a statue honoring her heritage, Astland, which is the name for a kind of a the pan Hispanic nation to the south of us, and she's carving that out. She's taking the Statue of Liberty, carving it out, and refiguring it. Instead of being a melting pot, now it's something that can express her culture better.
We have an interesting question, an interesting point of view on the statue, on the image you've got on the screen right now. Person notes, I love that all of that culture is hidden under the surface of the cliche Statue of Liberty. Is it hidden and being revealed, or is the Statue of Liberty being transformed into it?
Yeah.
That would be an interesting point. And then we have an interesting question that brings us to this very image here. As educators, do we encourage our students to embrace their individuality and ethnicity, particularly if they're recent immigrants or children of immigrants, or do we encourage them to assimilate? So maybe we could hear a little bit of discussion on that and your views on this image before we wrap things up here tonight. Are our schools encouraging assimilation or encouraging the embracing of ethnicity? Because we're trying to show how we combine all of our ethnicities together, back to the salad bowl and the mosaic metaphors, into some kind of coherent whole. Okay? Well, how do you think your students would respond to the Libertad image we have before us now? I think the statue is being transformed. I think this is a very a very provocative image, to say the least. It's being taken over. Yeah. Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. I'm amazed at how well my students actually embrace their ethnicities. I think more emphasis on testing. I would ask them what they think about the statue and encourage discussion. Yeah. Which is what we all aim for. So I have enjoyed this very much. I wish we had more chance for conversation, but I really appreciate the chance to interact with all of you, even if only a little bit remotely. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our session. I hope we have answered all of your questions. We've gone a little bit over. Thank you for sticking with us. Please use the forum to continue the discussion, to share fresh approaches. We'll monitor the forum until March 15th, which means that when we get questions and comments there, we'll pass them on to Joy, and she'll get back in touch with you. I want to remind you that our next Teaching with Primary Sources National Humanities Center seminar. Not going to happen for a while yet. It'll be August 7th, 2012. Why Some New World Colonies Succeeded and Others Failed. It'll be led by Kathleen Duval, a National Humanities Center Fellow and an Associate Professor of History at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Joy, I want to thank you for giving us an excellent seminar this evening. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody.
Yes, and I want to thank our participants for their participation this evening, your intelligent responses, and your enthusiasm. Please join us again, not only for a TPS seminar, but check our website to see what other seminars we're offering. We've got several more to go this spring on some interesting topics, and I hope you'll join us for those. In the meantime, thank you very much. Please submit your evaluations. Don't forget those. As I said, they're very important to us. And ladies and gentlemen, let me wish you a good evening. Thank you. Hope we see you again soon. Bye-bye.